The winter meetings finally got things going last week in Orlando. They're over now. We'll talk about the deals that finally happened after a few days. We'll also talk about a Mets fan fest that I went to that was something that I think everybody would find very interesting. It's This Week in Baseball. I was, my friend Kelly Franco, I saw her yesterday at this Mets fan thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. But she went down to the winter meetings last week. And I remember thinking, like Sunday night, but we talked about this on our podcast on Monday last week. There was no deal. There was no deal on Monday. And I'm thinking, like, what are these people doing in this hotel in Orlando with no deals, right? Just
They're
waiting to report on something.
They're doing what we're all doing, just closer to the source of it.
And so she's interviewing Scott Boras, and because people had, we got nothing to do, so let's talk. So that was pretty good. She got some good guests, and then it finally got going.
Right. Finally, some people started to sign. I mean, we saw that. I think the first big piece was Diaz to the Dodgers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
he was the first really big name.
Well, and Schwarber and Diaz happened at virtually the same time.
Okay, so that might have just been my perception because I paid attention to one much more than the other.
So yeah. So Diaz, and let's talk about that a little bit because obviously as Met fans, we hate to lose a guy who was as good as Edwin Diaz was for the Mets most of the time he was there, and in particular this past year.
Right, and I'd say these are probably two of the four most premier names on the market, with really only Tucker and Framber Valdez being the big, with Cease being off the board for so long already.
Of course.
So, I mean, I think when you look at a guy like Diaz, the Dodgers offered him a 3-year, $69 million deal, which is the highest AAV for a reliever ever. The Mets offered him a 3-year, $66 million deal.
Well, the Mets went to him first.
Yeah.
With 3 years at 22 for 66, like you say. And then Diaz went to the Dodgers, and the Dodgers offered him 23. He never went back to the Mets.
Right, so he went to the Dodgers. But what I'm saying is Diaz was getting the highest paid reliever contract that's ever been given this offseason.
And as much as he said nice things about the Mets as he was walking out the door, he did not want to go back there. So to me,
or he wanted to go to Los Angeles more. Like, look, if you're a guy at right. If you're somebody like Diaz, and when you people
you're 32,
especially because now we're all going, well, look at Aroldis Chapman, he's getting it done at 37. Those people are outliers. You can't judge. We can't be sitting here going, oh, well, Verlander and Scherzer are effective into their 40s. Clearly, that's something we should expect from all starting pitchers. No, conventional wisdom says exactly don't expect that. And so when you have to look at a guy like Diaz, if you're Diaz, you might only have 1 or 2 years of truly elite effectiveness left. The third year, you might still be a good reliever, but you're no longer Sugar. You're no longer Timmy Trumpet's entrance most dominant reliever in baseball, and there's nothing you could do about it at that point in your contract.
And we'll talk about the Mets stuff later on, but let's face it, he only had 28 saves this year, and it was a lack of opportunities that was part of the problem. He will get plenty more opportunities with the Dodgers in 26.
Unless the Dodgers bludgeon people to death.
Well, that's true. That's true also.
But in terms of if you're a player who wants to win the World Series, and Edwin Diaz is a guy that can make an argument for a Hall of Fame pretty much only if he gets a World Series ring.
Yeah, I think he's got a way to go.
And he's got, but a ring is the only way I think he even sniffs it, given his current statistics.
I don't know if that would matter to a closer or not.
Right, but I'm just an elite postseason run with a dominant Dodgers team. I'm just saying
help.
It would do a lot.
You also better have 250 or more saves. I don't know if Evan's going to get 300 again.
Right, exactly. So I'm saying he needs something else because he's not going to get the statistical numbers to get there. And going to the Dodgers, let's face it, it's the best path to a World Series title right now.
I do think had he gone back to the Mets and said the Dodgers offered me 23, if that means match it and I'll stay there, the Mets would have done it. He didn't give them the opportunity. I think the Mets were caught a little bit with their pants down because they thought he would come back to them, and he didn't want to. And a guy who did go back was Kyle Schwarber, who went back, and I said that. I think I had said it. I think you had said it as well. It just felt like he had to go back to Philadelphia. He wasn't going to go to the Reds or the Pirates.
Right, that just doesn't make sense. Like, the only reason Schwarber would do that was because one of those teams backed up a deal for him that was just so ludicrous. He
6 years, 180 would have done it.
Right. Where they're giving him something where he's like, I can't say no to that, guys. I'm sorry. And obviously, since nobody was going to do that given his age, it makes the most sense to stay in Philadelphia. The team's good enough as currently composed that if everything goes right, they could win a World Series. So why go to some other team where no matter where you're going, you're likely taking a step back unless you also join the Dodgers, which you can't because you're playing the same position as Ohtani.
So, and the the Phillies still have some work to do in a division that is getting more difficult for everybody because the Braves keep adding, and their thing, and they,
And we'll step around to the other big move right now. I think the other big move this week that people would go and Pete Alonso to the Orioles. We'll step around that for the moment, and we'll talk about Robert Suarez to the Braves, going to them for 3 years for $45 million a year. Now that is a big high average,
it's the same as Devin Williams got,
right? Except Robert Suarez is quite a bit older than Devin Williams.
I think he's like 3 years old.
Right.
Like
and
that.
That's a big deal with a reliever because, like we were saying with
He only got 3 years.
But if he falls off after year one, now you've got a reliever you're paying 2 more years for $15 million a year. That stinks. And that's possible, not through any fault of Robert Suarez's own, other just, unfortunately, Father Time's the greatest opponent he's ever played.
And then, he was the guy the Mets said, well, if we don't get Diaz, we're going to get Robert Suarez. Well, no, he's gone.
Right. And so then the Mets are sitting there going, okay, fine, we'll just re-sign Tyler Rogers. Nope, he's going to the Blue Jays. As they back up a huge contract for him.
Didn't you think so?
3 years, $37 million.
For Tyler Rogers.
Right. It tells you, what, good on the Jays. It shows that they're clearly all in on this group.
They're serious. Yes.
In an AL East that is continuing to reload, it makes sense. And I gotta think this means they're re-signing Bo Bichette.
You're right, and I think so too. I think that's the guy for them, and they can smoke screen out. Maybe they'll bring in Kyle Tucker. Maybe they'll bring in,
It makes no
Bellinger.
sense to make the moves they make if they're not bringing back Bo Bichette. Because even if you go and get Kyle, let's say you go and sign Kyle Tucker. Okay, well, what are you doing at shortstop then? You still have the same problem.
Yeah, and so that whole division. Let's talk about the AL East because and we'll talk about Alonso as it pertains to the Mets, but he goes to the Orioles, which is obviously un-Oriole like. For them to go and pay that kind of money.
And in terms of filling a hole in their roster, their first basemen were terrible last year. They hit like 14 combined home runs and had an OPS of like 650 something. Pete cleared that by miles last season.
And he makes the whole lineup. And there are good hitters who had bad years last year. We talked about that with the Orioles.
Right.
Having a guy like Pete around and all that feels a little comforting.
Right, especially really the only guys I think that team didn't underperform last year were Gunnar Henderson and
Westberg?
Yes. Everybody else had a pretty down year. Adley had another down year, and I think there has to be concern starting to happen around that because that's like 2.5 years of pretty consistently like middling play from him after he had that unbelievable year when they won the division. So you're like, okay, we need him to bounce back because what's going on there. But in terms of just overall solidifying that lineup, that's great, and they're going to need it because they still haven't signed any pitching.
Well, and it's funny because there was some talk this week about, could the Orioles do what the Blue Jays did last year and go from worst in the division to first in the division? From an offensive standpoint, I think their lineup can turn it around and be that good. But like you just said, well, who's going to go out there and get outs? Because, the guy that you would have put at the top of the rotation isn't there anymore in Grayson Rodriguez.
Right, and it's just like you've also, I hate to do this to Pete, but you've downgraded your defense.
Yeah.
And as somebody that watched Met pitchers struggle last year, and I think one of the things that we didn't talk about is how directly correlated the poor Met defense was with the poor Met pitching performance. There was definitely a link there, people. And
it's a link, and it's not all of it, but it's a link for sure.
Right, and I got to think that had an impact on it. So it's going to be interesting to see, especially with a guy like Pete signing him to a long-term deal, which the Mets weren't committed to, because I think we won't go into the Mets, but the Orioles are going to have to ask them the question of, okay, when is Pete Alonso going to be DH for our team?
Right, and I think that's ultimately the plan for them, to do that. But I got to believe they're hoping they're going to get two years of defense at first base out of him before they have to make that.
They got to hope it's not 2025.
Yeah. Well, certainly on a defensive side of the ball.
And then the Rangers added Danny Jansen. There was
2 years.
There were 2 years.
Commitment.
The Yankees brought back Ahmed Rosario. So we had some. I think the biggest move that really happened outside of this probably is maybe the Mets going after Jorge Polanco, signing him away from the Mariners, because that was a big deal.
That's a big deal because the Mets had done nothing,
right?
And they got a guy that I guess can DH, and they talked about it. And, we'll talk about it in a couple of minutes because I'll talk about what the mood was when they signed him. When I was at this conference. So, but I think the big deals of the week really go to the Tigers because they re-signed Kyle Finnegan, and what's interesting about Kyle Finnegan, they also signed Kenley Jansen. So they signed Jansen for a year at $11 million. They signed Finnegan for 2 years and $21 million. And Finnegan left the Nationals. No, he was a free agent last season and like got like a $4 million deal. I couldn't figure out why is all the hate for Kyle Finnegan? Like I thought he was good when he pitched for the Washington.
He wasn't
Nationals.
Great for the
But
Nationals.
he was good,
yeah,
and he was good, really good for the Tigers last year.
Right, he was great for them.
So the fact nobody took a chance on this guy, and the Tigers got
And
him
it
in a
paid
trade,
off.
and it paid off, and now he'll be there. And I think adding that to Will Vest and the bullpen, I think the Tigers bullpen is in way better shape than it was last year. And I said they needed to do that, and they have.
The Tigers are doing.
Now they need to sign Bregman.
They got to do something else because I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, signing Kyle Finnegan is nice, signing Kenley Jansen nice, re-signing Finnegan is nice, but like, there's no move that organization has made, especially with all those rumors swirling about them thinking about trading Skubal to the Dodgers because they like to package the Dodgers. They didn't do it, but they apparently
They still might.
They're still entertaining the idea.
They still might.
Right, and so it's hard for me to say the Tigers are having a nice offseason until they do something that convinces me they're not actually going to do that.
Well, and it goes one of two ways, right? Because the way you've set up your bullpen now makes me think that they're not going to trade Skubal, which is, for anybody that talks about baseball, I think that's crazy because he can walk after the season and they get nothing because they're not going to pay him the $40+ million a year
Scott
for
Boras
7
is going to be
years.
like, what am I going to do to make you this
Somebody's
the
going
best?
to pay him that, and I would 99% say it won't be the Tigers.
Right, so the Tigers are faced with the decision of, do we keep him here this
Try
year?
to win the World Series this year.
Right, and they got to do something other than
Seems
what they've
that's
done.
the way they're headed right now by making those bullpen moves. Because why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Once you trade Skubal, I think your World Series hopes are over.
Right, you can't trade Skubal and not consider yourself a World Series hopeful team in that way.
So
I mean, Mike Soroka goes to the D-backs. Steven Matz signed with the Rays. I mean, those are just MLB teams signing major league pitchers.
mainly major league players, and it was the guys that are left out there made me think so we're still waiting to hear what happens with Framber Valdez, with Ranger Suarez, with Michael King, and
the consolation prizes that are Merrill
the two
Kelly
D-backs pitchers, former D-back pitchers, Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly. I so that's still out there to happen, and and if the teams are unwilling, they're fighting not to give long deals. It seems like there's almost, I hate to use the C word for collusion, but why are they waiting so long to sign these pitchers when everybody needs pitching?
I don't think it's collusion, because collusion would imply that they're trying to manipulate this for some other end. I think it's just an instance where the teams just all want the same thing, which is to not give these guys long-term deals. No, I think that's all the teams hedging their bets. I think the fact that the Mets aren't offering big-term, long-term contracts is both a business move because of uncertainty about the future of baseball, and also a team development move where they're saying we have one of the best farm systems in baseball, and we might as well get into the Mets now and Pete Alonso. They're looking at their team and saying, look, we got one of the best young farm systems in baseball. We have a 27-year-old Juan Soto on our roster. That 28?
Yeah, maybe
20. That's our future. And so it doesn't make sense to tie up any of our positions with long-term deals to guys that are over 30 when we're planning on bringing up guys to replace them, which is why they would make a trade like getting rid of Brandon Nimmo.
Right. Well, and let's turn to that in a second. I just wanted to mention one other thing, and another Met guy that we love, and Gary Cohen did not win the Ford Frick Award. It went to Joe Buck, and I kind of feel like that's a family achievement award for the Joe Buck. I'm fine with Joe Buck. Mm-hmm. I liked him better for baseball than I did for football when he did it. But the fact that Gary Cohen has been doing this for 40 years and doing it at the top of his profession, I feel for Gary because I know he wants it. And how many times he's going to have to be on this ballot and be passed over. But I think that's what happens because there's a lot of good broadcasters that are on that Ford Frick ballot.
Right, and eventually it'll be his turn.
I hope so. I hope so because Gary is the best. So let's talk about this, and it started that I knew Kelly was going to be doing an interview with Brett Beatty yesterday at the Mets Fan Fest, but I had never been to a Fan Fest event before. Mm-hmm. I was a little like, okay, what's this going to be like? And what I found when I got there was this is like the 8th year that they've done this.
So it's popular.
I guess it started like in a bar or something like that, and now I'd say there was 200 crazy Met fans at this thing, and that's what my first impression was when I walked in. And it's in a hotel in a ballroom, and there's people selling stuff, you can buy and sign. And I think all the fans were pretty much dressed up in Met regalia,
as you would expect.
As you'd expect. These people were there for autographs of the people that were speaking. I didn't realize that was for them. I didn't pay for the fast line or whatever.
But that was the main draw.
There's a huge area roped off in the front where the guys sign, and so and the feeling was to me the feeling I got was these are the real Met fans. These are not the luxury box Met fans. These are the folks sitting in the upper deck that can barely scrape together.
That bleed orange and blue.
I don't know how they scraped together the $80 to go to this thing for the day. One of my friends was there and said that my partner couldn't come, he couldn't afford it. So that's real, right? And so I kind of like that because it felt real, the people that were there, and these were knowledgeable Met fans,
right? They're gonna know these are the people that, as we said, live, breathe, and die Mets. And so I have to imagine it was a very tense room given this offseason.
It was. We were all waiting, and Jesse Orozco was the leadoff guy, right? So
that's a tough position.
Well, it's good because you got to talk about 1986 and how wonderful
it
was.
Right. Put everybody at least a good.
Where's Jesse's glove? People kept asking. When he threw it high in the air, he goes, "It's still up there." And Jesse was great. He was really appreciative and was actually a little taken aback by the reception that he got from the people because people went nuts. They were cheering and standing for him and all that. He goes, "Thanks, I guess."
Right. And I think that happened should suggest to anybody listening, just to the average age of the person that was in this room.
That's true. That was true. I don't know if I was among the younger ones.
You were among your
probably right in.
You were among your peers. Right. But I've been saying that's the vibe of.
There were dads there with their kids and daughters, and there was I'd say a handful of that. So I like the fact that
it's not strictly
not strictly, but it was definitely leaning hard in that direction. And Jesse Orozco talked about the 1986 season, and did you want to face Mike Scott in Game 7? And no, he didn't want to do that. And it made me think about 1988 when they lost to the Dodgers, and Oral Hershiser he got to pitch those extra games, and the Dodgers beat the Mets, and Mike Scott didn't get to pitch that Game 7 where the Mets might not have gotten past it. So really fun to have him sort of lead the thing off. And then they went to the State of the Mets, and I think it was during that the news came that the Mets traded for Jorge Polanco. And so
they signed him.
They signed Jorge Polanco, who was at Seattle last year. And you can see everybody's looking at their phone and they're whispering amongst and somebody goes, "Okay, we just got Jorge Polanco."
A tepid reception.
Yes, and then over the next 10, 15 minutes, people they're looking him up,
right.
Everybody knew that he'd played one game at first base in his whole career. Everybody knew that within about 10 minutes.
Right.
Because that's to play first base. What?
No, because mostly what I'm seeing is Jorge Polanco. He's an older player who's pretty injury prone. He's going to
31.
Right.
32.
He suffered. He missed a lot. I think he hasn't played more than 120 games in a season in a while.
Yeah.
So he's definitely. I think what he is he's a Marte replacement.
Yeah,
in functionality, I think Marte will actually still end up being on this team.
I think so.
Purely from a vibe standpoint,
that would be the only reason. But it's so limiting, and David Stearns doesn't appear to have the desire to have guys on the team that can only do one thing.
Right, but I wonder if that'll happen. But Jorge Polanco, in terms of role, seems to sort of be there to replace what Marte brought to the team, which is a solid right-handed bat. He was a good hitter for the Mariners last
he's a switch
year.
Hitter.
Right, and I think what was big is the Mariners wanted him. They just didn't want to pay him that much money. So this was, I
turned to everybody and I said, $20 million a year doesn't buy what it used to.
Right, and that's what you have to think. And now the bigger thing for the Mets, and probably why they're willing to pay him $20 million a year, is because they're only paying him for 2 years, and that was the big thing for them.
So one of the things that I had been saying all week, David Stearns had a 5-year contract he got from Steve Cohen when he took over there.
He's in year 3 now.
He is starting year 3. He has 3 years left, and he only wants to give 3-year contracts or less. It just feels like that can't be really happening. Like from above, they're going, don't give any contracts more than 3 years because you may not be here after that. Right. That's like a business thing.
No. I think what this is, in the case of Jorge Polanco, my guess is the Mets are probably looking at a timeline and saying Juan Soto is going to be our DH within the next 3 seasons, so it doesn't make sense to have a 30-plus-year-old guy on our roster that can only DH, which is why you might, unfortunately, not re-sign a guy like Pete Alonso.
I don't know if I want Soto to be not be an outfielder.
I want Soto to not be an outfielder.
But the way he's playing defense, unless he does the miraculous turnaround like he did with his base running this year, I'm actually a really good fielder.
Right.
And I just worked on it in the offseason.
I'm not counting on that.
No, neither am I.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Juan Soto's going to be our DH, which is why I think, the Mets were not interested in re-signing Pete Alonso, because it wasn't that they weren't interested, but they knew that Pete Alonso has to become a DH, because to anybody anybody that thinks we're being harsh on Pete Alonso's defense.
When we love him.
Last year, there were 40 qualified first basemen in terms of defense. Pete Alonso was 39th.
Who's 40?
Michael Toglia.
No. For you. Good for you.
Pete's not just a bad defender. He's one of, and I'm,
you can't sugarcoat that.
Right, and I'm not trying to be mean. He's just not a good defender. I'm not. Being mean would be say he gets your pitchers hurt.
Who's the first Oriole pitcher that's going to go on the disabled list because of a bad Pete Alonso throw in first base?
Being mean, but Pete. One of the things I thought was interesting is first base defense. We have to reevaluate it because of the rise of left-handed hitters in your lineup.
More balls being smashed to that side of the field.
It's turning more and more into third base. We're seeing first baseman being called to move around, make athletic plays, fielding the ball, and throwing the ball more than ever. And that's something we know Pete Alonso, there's a lot of things he's good at. Throwing the ball is not one of them.
No, definitely not. And one of the weird things I think was with his defense this year is as he moved to his right, he would overrun the ball, and the ball would go inside of him instead of him making the play. So he was kind of getting there, but not making the play.
And he would also over pursue balls to his right, which would then lead him to have to make throws to the pitcher from a really low.
Like, what? I gotta get over.
The pitchers, you're seeing pitchers constantly have to try and run and catch the ball at a dead sprint because they're not expecting to have to make a play there. Because they, as somebody that's been on the mound, you roughly have an idea when the ball is hit over kind of in the first base area of whether or not you need to cover.
You should know.
So you probably you might start making a move over there, but there's certain balls where you're not expecting to have to go over to first base, and if all of a sudden you're like, why is my first baseman in the second base hole fielding that ball? And then you have to sprint over there. So I think that was an issue, and I also think that same DH reasoning is why Mark Vientos is not long for the Mets.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Again, the whole limited thing doesn't fit with the versatility and defense first that David Stearns is saying.
And when you know that you're on a roster with a guy that's destined to be the DH in Soto, you'd have to be a hell of a DH to make the Mets want to put you there over Juan Soto.
Well, and I think Ron Darling said this first that I remember last week when they traded Alonso, and the Mets still haven't done anything. So from the vantage point, and this is part of what was going on there, right now, it was right now, if you look at this team, you can't feel very good about it. And Pete Alonso's going to walk more than 150 times.
No, Soto's going to walk.
Soto's going to walk 150 times this year. So you have this guy you're paying, the most money ever, and he's not going to be able to bat very often because they're going to just walk him.
Counterpoint: how many times did Juan Soto walk this year?
130.
Oh man, Juan Soto walked 20 more times this year. Unplayable.
It would be better if he walks 160 times.
But he would have to walk in order of magnitude.
Barry Bonzi.
Right. It would have to be getting close to the 180 to 200 range. Right. And even then, if he's at that mark, that's such an insane statistic. It's going to have knock-on effects elsewhere.
So the Met fans were, you could tell everybody had this angst going on, and so everybody on the panel was trying to sort of let's get in and off the ledge and come inside a little bit. And the question that I asked the panelists was, did anybody here really think that the Mets and David Stearns could fix what ailed them in this one-off season, such that they'd be a team that could compete for the NL East and beyond next year? And the answer, Lori was the one. I think she was from SNY. Lori was really good answer. She was very good about it. I think she said no.
Right, and I think most
basically
and I think most Met fans
there kind of knew it too.
If you would ask them at the beginning of the offseason, they would have said yes to that question. But then when they lose Alonso and Diaz, and now you're faced with a prospect of we might not even make the playoffs because we're not good, then it becomes a lot easier to convince yourself, well, if we just did these things, we would be a World Series contending team. If we just went outside Ranger Suarez, Framber Valdez, and Kyer Tucker, we're back in this baby.
And here's why I felt this was realistic Met fans in this event. Number one, and they talked about 2022. Well, they won 101 games. Yeah, but even in that year, the way they went down to the Padres, in the playoffs and all that team sort of overperformed to win 101 games. And then they had the horrible 2023 season. And then last year, and then in 2024, they got thrown off because they never expected to contend. And then they got on that hot streak after the awful start. And so now you had a team that made it to the NL Championship Series. You're thinking, we got to try to win again. And that screwed up their timing.
Right. And so much I remember talking about last off season was, we got years from pitchers. I was like, I'm concerned about signing Sean Manaea because I don't know if you'll ever get a better season out of him than what you did in 2024. And right now, that was looking like a prescient statement. Now, there's a good chance he turns it around and is clearly...
Well, it'd be easy to be better than he was last year.
Right. But there was a lot of, like, we got years out of guys in 2024 that you would, like, I'm like, Dendel Nunez was an unbelievable reliever for them in 2024. And I'm like, am I really just going to believe that this guy is suddenly that level of reliever in the major leagues? Or is it a fluky thing, especially because reliever ERA is a notoriously fluky statistic? It can really be swingy off of a couple things that really isn't necessarily the reliever's fault. And so, like there was just a lot of things that were hard to believe that, like, oh yeah, that Mets team, they made the NL championship. They're a lock to go back and face the Dodgers again. But then to start off so well, and
so that's a great point, right? Because they went 46 and 45 and 46 and 29 to start the season, so really good, and they were in first place and before Pete made that horrible throw to Senga, and Senga got injured, and everything kind of went down the drain after that. But the point was, add that to the 2024 finish. Now you're thinking, man, we're getting years out of Griffin Canning. We're getting years out of Clay Holmes. Like everybody was pitching, and you kind of knew it was thin. And then when it collapsed, it was like, oh, this is really what it was all the time.
Right. The bottom, like the other shoe finally dropped. Like the thing that you knew was always lurking there, the bad version of the New York Mets that we would see pop up in a game here and there.
It was there the year before until they turned it around.
Right. And unfortunately, the team that we saw, it was probably somewhere between those two teams, which was a team that doesn't make the playoffs.
Right, and not only did they not make the playoffs, but they collapsed kind of spectacularly. Had they started last season, let's say, 37 and 35 or something like that, and then finished 83 and 79, you went, yeah, okay, that's kind of what they were all season. But because they started so well, you got, they're in first place.
It's a collapse.
The Braves are having a bad year. This is it, man. It's right in front of us. But you were relying on guys to pitch that you thought, oh, please let this be real.
Even when even when it was going well, those pitchers weren't pitching deep into games.
Oh, there you go. And Terry Collins, who came on after, and Terry's great, and he's people got the best manager in New York Mets history is what they introduced him as. I'm like, yeah, is he? Seems right. Yes, and they didn't win a World Series, but let's say.
But the guys that did win a World Series were there for such short periods.
Danny Jansen and Gil Hodges, anyway, I thought it was an interesting, conversation to think about that. But Terry said, yeah, the pitcher's got to go more than 4 2/3 innings, 5 innings, and that's what killed the Mets.
Right, yeah. And so. The question on that is, where is that coming from? Because in part, it was pitcher effectiveness. There's a lot of games where those guys simply were not good enough to be in the game anymore past 4 2/3 innings. Sometimes...
and Mendoza got criticized sometimes for hooking a little too quick.
Right. Mendoza had a quick hook a lot last season.
Now, he saw what we all saw, and he probably wasn't wrong to think these guys are weakening. They were. But what he didn't realize is by going to the bullpen early every single game, he killed his bullpen.
Right, and by the end of the year, he had just gone through all the
He didn't have a lot of choice, and I think they kind of knew that was a possibility. But I think if he had to do it all over again, he would probably have left some of those guys in longer just for the greater good.
Right, there were games where he could have left them in for sure. And so I think all of that just kind of compounded over the season. And the thinness at pitcher that always existed, suddenly when guys aren't having career runs, just dried up.
And, Terry Collins was up there with umpire Tom Hallion. I remember Tom Hallion, and what I had forgotten is that Hallion was the guy on the field for Terry's famous rant. So they went on for about 15-20 minutes. They showed Terry's famous rant in 2015 where, the whole... So Chase Utley got injured. Ruben Tejada broke his leg.
Right.
Okay,
and so the next season, Syndergaard throws behind Utley. He doesn't hit him. He just throws behind him.
Way behind him.
And he gets thrown out of the game. And so Terry...
By the home plate umpire, who was a AAA umpire who'd come up to the major, so he wasn't mic'd up.
Right.
It turns out Hallion was mic'd up at, I think, first base because he was the senior umpire. And so you don't really hear when he throws out, Syndergaard, what's going on. They're trying to figure out, why'd you throw me out? I didn't hit anybody. I threw it behind him, and then Terry comes running out of the dugout, and finally Hallion comes over and talks to Terry, and Terry gives his famous, you got to give us a shot. And Hallion said, so what I said to him was, you had your shot. Oh, and you missed it. Right? So had Syndergaard hit Utley, the whole thing would have been over. Right,
but he had thrown one pitch. I remember because that was the second pitch was the one he put behind him because he had thrown one pitch that was just kind of inside but he didn't hit him, and so everybody knew he had to do something else, but he didn't want to hit him,
Right.
so he threw behind him, and then they're like, we have to run you now.
They didn't really have to run. They could have warned him, and that was the mistake on the part of the former AAA umpire who was doing the plate that night, because he escalated the whole thing. But they went and nobody knew that that Hallian was mic'd up, or they had forgotten. So Terry didn't know. So the vernacular was strong, and the beeping and the bleeping and all that. So it was kind of hilarious. And Terry said after every game, when they have this audio, they're supposed to destroy the audio for the game.
And
4 years later, this turns up on YouTube. So not destroy it. And so it was really.
And all I will say is thank you to that kind MLB employee that did that for all.
It's
of
one
us.
of the great. If you want to watch, it's one of the great rants of all time.
And I think what you saw there is, and this is what even shows you, is that the managers and umpires know the difference between when the manager is out there performatively arguing with them and they're actually pissed off and arguing with them, because that was their whole thing with like the language that Terry was using. I am sure there's times where Terry basically stomps up to home plate. They know he has to kind of just be there and be angry.
Where are you going to dinner?
Right.
I don't know where you're going.
Right. And it's just them yelling nonsense at one another. But when Terry came out there to argue that, he was genuinely mad, and that was an actual argument.
You had your shot and you missed.
Right. And that was and I think that was even kind of our reaction back when it happened, if I remember. We're like, once you missed the first time, you can't throw behind him the second pitch.
You remember the Mets pitcher that tried to hit Roger Clemens when he was batting against the Mets after Clemens had hit some guys.
Was it Rick?
No, and he missed him. He couldn't hit him. And then later in the game, he came up and he hit a home run off of Clemens. He only pitched for the Mets for a short time. Left-hander Sean Estes in 2002. He tried to hit him. He couldn't hit him. Clemens is a big guy. How do you miss him?
Hitting the home run off of him is better.
Yeah, that was a pretty good response there. And then the last segment was Brett Beatty,
current third baseman.
Current third baseman. And Kelly did a great job of interviewing Brett, kind of letting him think. She kind of got into the fact that he mentioned that he had just gotten engaged and how important that was, and his fiance was in the audience against the wall. So she's and they congratulate them, and she goes, "Well, I'm a woman, and because I'm a woman, I'm going to go deep here because I have to ask stuff that that Brett would never ask."
You have to see Brett Beatty's just life flashing before his eyes.
Proposal? Did you get down on one knee? Stuff. So, but Beatty just, I hate to say it, delightful kid, but he's all of that, and really well trained. I mean, he's a young guy, early 20s, and every time he was asked a question by one of the people, including me, he'd ask you. So I said, my name's Mark. Hi, Brett. And he would ask you, what was your name again? They had never said their name, but he's trained to make sure that he asks, so that when he responds to the question, he goes, "Okay, Gordon, that's a great question. Let me explain." So just really,
you could see how and that's something that I think we as fans don't appreciate, is the amount of time that they also spend doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's time they spend going and learning these things and learning how to do that, because there's so many times they're in public talking to people that we don't even think about it.
He talked about, his best friend on the team is Vientos. Swag, actually.
Swaggy V.
Swag. And he's, the guy that it takes the longest to get ready in the locker room and all that kind of stuff. Thinks he's the most handsome or whatever, something like that.
Right. That sounds like what we've seen out of Vientos.
He tooled on Jeff McNeil the entire time because they're friends, and I guess Jeff McNeil is always taking him out to dinner for some reason or another. So we go to Fogo de Chao all the time with Jeff. He goes, "What's your favorite thing to eat?" He goes, "A meal paid for by Jeff McNeil." and he talked about the fact that he and Vientos are like really good friends, and they compete for the same position, and they're really for each other, and that there's love. He used the word love a few times between the guys in the team, and I think it reminded me that we don't have any freaking idea what's going on in that locker room. You can hear the Soto isn't getting along with Lindor.
Kettle Marte is difficult to get along with in Arizona.
Fans don't have any idea, and I think there's a lot of smoke screens thrown out to the people in the media who do have access to sort of, keep them off the track of what's really going on.
Because as much as we like to have an idea of
nobody's business,
these rumors, I think one of the things the players they might not like a guy, but they care about upholding the sanctity of the locker room much more than they care about dunking on a teammate they might not get along with. Because sure, it might feel really good to let out that report that everybody in the locker room hates Juan Soto, but that's way worse for you in the long run to let that kind of thing out. than the benefit and the immediate thing of feeling good that you finally said something.
And and the Mets were the place that nobody wanted to go, and the Wilpons, bought them. Then Steve Cohen buys them, and he starts doing stuff. And all of a sudden, he's the place that he wants to go. Because the Mets are family, and they take care of. They have like, I think Beatty talked about, or somebody talked about the fact that they have babysitting services for the Mets, so that the wives can go to the games and actually watch the game, and the kids are happy to play with the other kids, and they put things like that in there. And so the Mets have done a lot to sort of make it a better place to go. I don't think you can turn around from that all of a sudden be the place that nobody wants to go again, simply because you didn't sign Pete Alonso and you traded Brandon Nimmo.
Right. You got a young guy like Brett Beatty who's coming up, who's with the organization. Now he's seeing that this is what you want to build, that, because then we have young guys and they go and maybe Brett Beatty doesn't stay with the Mets forever, but if he remembers his young time here with the Mets fondly and talks about, well, when he goes to different teams, that sort of positive sentiment about your culture there does have an effect and rings throughout the league. And that's why, when you look at a guy like Beatty, I imagine, like, for him, he's on a team with 2 Hall of Famers. He's probably learning a lot. Like did you get to ask?
Well, that's exactly, it's funny you said that's the question I asked him. I said, so, Brett, you're playing with 2 future Hall of Famers. I'm calling Lindor a future Hall of Famer. I think we know Soto will be as well. And I said, so what can you take from learning from those guys that that you kind of use yourself? He goes, that's really interesting. He goes, because he didn't say it was the same thing, different things. He just said Lindor is always talking. He's always instructing. He's always trying to inform you of what's going on and how he's going to do something. And he claimed that Lindor was the smartest baseball mind on the Mets, which I thought that's a bold thing to say, because there's a lot of smart guys on that team.
Right. And but it speaks, because we've heard stuff about Lindor wanting to be a manager, and those are things
engaged in all that. And what he said about Soto was, it's just preparation. What the guy does to be ready to do everything he goes through days before the game, the day of the game, all the things that he does to prepare himself to play at his highest level. And that's how it looks when you look at those guys, right? Lindor's more of the happy-go-lucky, wears his heart on his sleeve guy, and Soto's the more stoic, just like, I'm just professional. I just want to hit.
And it's so interesting that you hear the 3. If you think about the 3, I would say, best hitters in baseball between Judge, Soto, and Ohtani, they all kind of have that personality.
Yep, that's a good point.
That is, they are preparation fanatics in terms of just like, I have my routine. I'm going to abide by my routine. I study my opponents in this way. I do everything very particularly, because by doing everything in the exact way I'm intending to do it, that's what puts me at my best. And that's why they're all the hitters that they are.
So the Queens Baseball Convention was an experience.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'll go every year, I would say, but I think to understand it from the fans' perspective, that's what I got connected to in a way. And I think that, if you're a fan of any team, and your team, I asked Kelly, do the Yankees have this kind of thing? She goes, I don't know. And I'm like, so maybe the Yankees don't need to. I don't know if other teams do this kind of, maybe only crazy Met fans, who one of the guys said, and anybody who's here at this convention, you have a problem. You have a big problem. And so that kind of made us all laugh, because they're right.
Yeah, true.
So, all right. Our next podcast is going to be a book discussion about a Dodger player that nobody really thinks about. I remember him just being around when I was a kid. I didn't realize his history. Jim Gilliam.
It's been a fascinating read.
Author Steve Ditmore is going to come on with us, so look forward to that. We're going to post that next Monday. Thanks for listening.